Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah, that's not good. No.
Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening, and a very warm welcome. A very warm welcome to the Canberra Museum and Gallery, this wonderful gem in the heart of the city. We're here tonight for a special programme to mark International Women's Day, and it's called 10 by 10, Taking Care of Business. This year, the focus is on the 2014 theme for International Women's Day, ending poverty for women and girls through economic empowerment. I'm Harriet Elvin, and I'm the head of the Cultural Facilities Corporation, which has the great pleasure and honour of managing the Canberra Museum and Gallery, together with other cultural venues in the ACT. I'd like to start this evening by acknowledging that we're meeting on the land of the Ngunnawal people, and by paying my respects to their elders, past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending this event. Amongst our many special guests tonight, I'd like to particularly welcome Louise Douglas from the board of the Cultural Facilities Corporation, as well as representatives from the ACT Office for Women, our partners in this programme. Minister Birch, the Minister for Women and the Minister for the Arts, was hoping to open the proceedings tonight, but sends her apologies as something has come up as short notice and she's unable to be here. But she joins us in spirit, and I'll try and cover a number of the points that I know that she wished to make. Well, tonight, 10 wonderful Canberra women will take just 10 minutes each to tell us about their part in building and running businesses in this city, what the challenges are, and their goals for the future. Some of the speakers have just started a business, some have managed an enterprise for over 20 years, and some will speak about supporting other women to achieve their dreams. International Women's Day is, of course, a time to honour and celebrate the great achievements of women. But it's also an occasion to look ahead to the opportunities and choices that await future generations of women. And as we consider all that women have achieved, it's important to remember that there's still quite a gender gap in our economy. One disturbing example of this is the gap between women and men in terms of superannuation. Women have much less saved for their retirement. Currently, the average superannuation payment for women is a third of that for men, 37,000 compared with 110,000, quite a significant gap. Well, that gender gap means that forums like tonight's are an important opportunity to raise awareness about economic empowerment for women. We've brought together women who can consider the theme of economic empowerment from a number of viewpoints. These women all have a significant connection to our city and to its business life. It's time to be inspired and maybe a little bit awed by the incredible achievements of women in our community. In a moment, we'll begin our programme of speakers. Before we do, I'd just like to share with you what to expect tonight. As you'll see in your programme handout, the first session will include 5 of our 10 speakers, and this will be followed by a short supper break in the foyer. We'll then reconvene here in the theatrette for the second session of 5 speakers. Your programme handout contains biographies for each of our speakers, and I encourage you to read through these if you haven't already. Because given the number of speakers in the programme, I'll just be giving a very brief introduction for each one. Now, I'm afraid I'm going to be the most unpopular person in the room tonight as I try to contain these 10 wonderful women to tell their stories in just 10 minutes each. To help me in this daunting task, Kate Gardner will be the timekeeper and will ring a bell at the 8, thank you Kate, the 8 and 9 minute marks with the final bell at 10 minutes. So that we can fit everybody into the evening, we are going to be very strict with time, although I'm sure we could listen to each speaker for much longer. Time constraints also mean there'll not be a chance for questions and answers of a speaker, but I do encourage you to approach them at the supper break and carry on the discussion. This is a good opportunity now to let you know that we're live streaming tonight's programme and to remind everybody to check that you've switched off your mobile phone. Well, now to our first speaker. Cindy Rees-Mitchell is the Chief Executive Officer of No Sweat Fashions. This is a not-for-profit social enterprise designed to create training, employment and work experience opportunities for migrants and refugees. Cindy has worked as a seed fund investment manager and in senior management roles at large corporate organisations in Australia and in the United States. In 2012, she moved into the public sector, starting in the Office for the Not-for-Profit Sector in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. She currently works with the Cabinet Implementation Unit. Cindy established No Sweat Fashions in a totally unpaid volunteer capacity. In addition to being an advocate for social enterprise, Cindy also believes that sewing is the language of love, having spent a significant proportion of her childhood poring over pattern books, musing over bolts of exotic fabrics, and collecting notions in fabric stores with her mother. And the sewers amongst you will know what notions are. Please join me in welcoming Cindy Rees-Mitchell.
Thank you very much for the invitation, for the kind invitation to come along today. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on today. Thank you again to the CMAG team. So the theme of this year's International Women's Day event is economic empowerment for women and girls. But I have to say, first of all, I don't really like the words economic empowerment. I prefer personally to talk about wealth. And I'd like to explain that by way of a personal story. When I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter, her father and I split up, and he left the country. So everything that I'd hoped for in terms of spending my daughter's first year with her was no longer an option. I was a single mom. So on this particular day, I'm driving around town with the Google Maps printout like this. Looking at every childcare center within a 50-mile radius of where I lived. I didn't have the luxury of whether I wanted foreign language immersion or Montessori or Steiner. I basically needed a clean place and living people. Those are my criteria. And of course, every single center was full. No one could guarantee me a place so that I could go back to work as soon as possible after the birth of my child. And I remember being quite panicked going into a Centrelink office. Can someone please tell me why a pregnant sobbing lady does not warrant a private office? But anyway, I'm out there. And they're asking what can they do for me if I have to quit my job. So friends, I wasn't thinking at the time, gee, I'm not feeling particularly economically empowered today. I was thinking, I do not have enough money to give me options to solve this problem. So the freedom to make decisions from a range of viable possibilities, that is wealth. And that is my sincere wish for every woman, and why No Sweat Fashions exists. Sometimes it's not just about money, it's about having knowledge of your rights at work and the confidence to ask for flexible working conditions, which I did have to do eventually. And it's about being able to network with others who have similar problems, and we call those extra benefits of wealth social inclusion. Now, I worked on the original microcredit program for women on low incomes with a marvelous team at Lighthouse Business Innovation Center, led by Anna Pino, who you'll hear later. And it was during a microcredit consult that I met the community leader that would go on to be the co-founder of No Sweat Fashions. And at our initial consult, he explained that he wanted to help a group of Karen women who were meeting regularly to do Burmese weaving. And he showed me pictures of what they were doing, and it was all really good, but I nearly shut him down, because I told him that unless he could find a bunch of Canberra public servants who were going to work dressed like traditional Burmese Hill Tribe women, it wasn't going to work, and we couldn't invest. Because he wouldn't be in any position to repay our loan. So at this point, we were starting to see lots of social enterprises, and every time they come, I'm like, social enterprise, what is that? Like, that just doesn't work. So here is the bad stuff that you're thinking about social enterprise. So particularly for those who are focused on hiring people who are experiencing barriers to mainstream employment. Productivity deficits make them highly uncompetitive when you try to deliver mainstream services. Your coffee made by a hipster barista in Braddon is very profitable. But if as an employer, you're also trying to provide that person with a place to live or drug rehabilitation services, your profits are gone before you've even taught him how to make a coffee. You could try to offer a non-mainstream service, sort of fill a niche, but initially no one probably is going to buy your stuff, and no one also is going to fund you long enough to allow you to develop a market. In other words, most of the time, social enterprise is really hard. And yet, I was quite intrigued by this concept. So as a lark, I headed up to Sydney to the School for Social Entrepreneurs and a meeting where I met Grace McQuilton. Grace is the founder and CEO of the Social Studio, and we, No Sweat, we owe a lot to that model. It's a retail shop, and all of the goods are produced by Sudanese fashion design students. Well, I went to this meeting one morning in Sydney, and by the time we'd driven back to Canberra, I was completely hooked. And I kept saying, well, somebody ought to start a social enterprise that brings together refugees and migrants and bring them together, and somebody should get a place for that Burmese sewing group to work. And eventually, I realized that I was going to be the somebody. So this project has and continues to change my life. I mentioned my job that I had at the time. It was something that I enjoyed a great deal, but a sort of hollowness descended over my work, because the work that I did was about helping people come up with the next big thing, the next big viral internet application or widget, and it just didn't mean very much to me after I had met people like Grace. It was wealth creation for the sake of making an elite group of wealthy people wealthier. Now, I'm not disparaging capitalism, those people who create jobs, and that's really good for society, but I started feeling that I was leaving work each day a little less rather than a little more. So I quit. I found an opportunity to join the Office for the Not-for-Profit Sector, and that was tasked with growing opportunities for social enterprise and social investment in Australia. So you think that's a good fit. They loved that I was a practitioner, that I had never worked in the public service, and I wasn't just a student of social enterprise. However, except for just a few small and occasional glimpses of brilliance and light, I was smacked in the face with the cold, wet reality that I was now a public servant. Dear so-and-so, congratulations on your election as the Grand Poobah of the Australian Association of Grand Poobahs. Signed, Julia Gillard. Nope. Kevin Rudd. Nope. So that was my first, almost like, when I nearly just started at PM&C. Dreaded ministerial correspondence, inane bureaucracy, the strange culture. But in some ways, No Sweat Fashions had prepared me for that too, because in our classes, in our little disused textiles classroom at Kaleen High School, we have mechanical engineers, doctors, small business owners. Those men and women are not above making bags and dolls and baby clothes for us to sell at markets. They are grateful to be honestly occupied, to be seen. They're grateful for the casual work that we offer, and for my impromptu whiteboard explanations of Australia's superannuation system. So from them, I learned to be grateful. And for a while, it really did make things better. I did have my days where I was like, what am I doing here? But it did make things better. After about 18 months now, I recently changed roles, and I can now say that I actually do have rather interesting work. But best of all, I have tremendous flexibility that, along with a supportive partner, allows me to keep No Sweat Fashions going. So we haven't made anyone wealthy in the traditional sense, but I do know that we are changing lives. Our theory of change is that social enterprise can facilitate economic empowerment through social, political, and cultural inclusion. And what we see happening is consistent with our theory. Women who have participated in our program have graduated to mainstream employment and study. Women have gone on to develop their own small business ventures and work in partnership with designers that they actually met as a result of working in our studio. And men and women have increased their social participation in the community, even going on to refer others to our project. We hardly have to worry about participants because they just keep telling more and more people about what we're doing as they increase in confidence. Over the last 2 years, we have embarked on a proof of concept, and I'm really proud of what we've accomplished. We've established a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee with a strong skills-based board of directors. We've turned a disused textiles classroom in a school into a thriving community and business hub. We've produced and launched our first collaboratively designed collection. We've had more than 30 men and women work and study in our studio. And we've mobilized an entire community around us. Just last night was our annual fundraising event, and it was incredible, as it has been for each of the last 3 years. So I'm not really sure what else life might have in store for me, but I love this community that has given me so much, and I feel privileged to be able to use my time and talents to serve it. Of course, one day I would like for it to be my actual occupation, not my part-time, full-time job on top of another full-time job. But for now, I am happy being a social entrepreneur and investing in the capacity and the potential of others. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Congratulations on all you're achieving, and congratulations on getting your speech in well under the 10-minute mark. You've set a very high bar there. No pressure on the next speaker, who is Elizabeth Avery Scott. Elizabeth is the co-founder and managing director of the Canberra Academy of Dramatic Arts. Elizabeth is also a playwright. Her play Love, Lies and Hitler was shortlisted for the Rodney Seaborn Playwrights Award in 2009. She's the first of 2 speakers tonight who've been recipients of the ACT Women's Microcredit Programme, Brilliant Ideas. Brilliant Ideas was designed to support the objectives of the ACT Women's Plan and the ACT Government's commitment to advance the economic status of women in the Territory. The programme represents a significant policy innovation with its direct investment in women on low incomes, recognising their ability to drive economic and social change. Elizabeth's business now has around 300 students across Canberra, and she was a finalist in the 2013 Telstra Business Women's Awards. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth.
Thank you, it's great to be here. Leanne was a shy little girl, about 10. It was a big day, the end-of-year performance for Carter in the theatre. Every year, all the children's classes, one after the other, perform short pieces for family and friends. Leanne's class was a small class of 3 students, as it had only started a few weeks before, but they all pulled together and prepared a short play, a 5-minute detective story. But there was a problem. Her older sister, who was also in the class and playing a role, was sick with a dreadful vomiting bug. There was no way she could go on the stage that day. This made Leanne very anxious. She and her sister were close. Her sister was her security blanket, and the play was something they were doing together. The problem was solved easily enough, of course. The teacher would step in and play the sister's role. The show must go on. But as we took Leanne in and showed her the theatre, and she saw the 180 empty seats that would later be filled, and the lights shining down on the stage, she became increasingly uncomfortable. The tears came. There was no way she could perform. What if she forgot her lines? What if she couldn't find her props? What if the play was a disaster? And the greatest fear of every 10-year-old, what if I get embarrassed? She was soon inconsolable. Her teachers spoke to her kindly, I spoke to her, we encouraged her, cajoled her, explained how fun it was all going to be. Nothing took, she just wouldn't do it. She was crippled by stage fright. The teacher had a word with me and said we might have to cut the play. I said to wait just a little longer. Over the following hour in the rehearsal, Leanne pulled herself together. She decided she would do it. And out she went on stage. You did it, I told her afterwards. You actually did it. How does it feel? Good, she said. But that was an understatement because she was elated. You've learned a life lesson today, I said. You were so frightened, so worried. But you know what? You got through. You got through and it turned out so well. Sometimes when we're frightened, we have to feel that fear and just get out there and do it anyway. Next time you feel like this again, you feel those same feelings, you'll remember today, won't you? She nodded and skipped away as happy as a lamb. Empowerment. To be empowered, we have to come first from a position of weakness and find something within ourselves to move forward. Leanne was empowered that day through her encounter with dramatic art. Mostly when I tell people that I run a drama school, they're immediately interested. I suppose it's colourful and fun, and people are interested in film and theatre and celebrities, so there's always something to talk about. And people are also surprised when I tell them about the scale of our operation, that we have over 300 students around Canberra in our programs for kids, and we have another 40 students spread across our 3 professional actor training programs. We have a Certificate 3 in Performance, a Diploma of Musical Theatre, and an Advanced Diploma of Performance. But every now and then I speak to someone who's not so enthusiastic. There's a doubting Thomas. Acting, they say, and that's where they raise their eyebrows. Acting. Oh, right. And is there much work for students when they graduate, or... And the oar hangs in the air, just waiting for me, baiting me. And it's an important question. I've spent the last 5 years of my life creating a drama school business, which now sustains my family, and for that reason has been economically empowering for me. But I'm also training people for a profession in the full-time courses that we run. One might reasonably ask, do you really think that teaching people to be actors is going to empower them economically? Or is it going to leave them with dashed dreams and impoverishment? The way I see it, actor training is a unique form of education. We lie on the floor and make odd sounds with our voices over and over again to increase our vocal range and projection and resonance. We stretch and contort ourselves in movement studies to increase our fitness and loosen up the wooden, rigid parts of our bodies. We do a lot of drilling and exercises till storytelling through our face and gesture and posture is second nature. We explore the big themes such as love, pain, sorrow and redemption by reading some of the greatest texts of all time, from Aristophanes through to Shakespeare through to Tennessee Williams. We learn to grapple with a script and mine it for clues, and then we work out how to embody that in a 3D space. Sometimes we make up stories from nothing but what's in our own heads at the time, and we learn to live comfortably with the tension that comes from not knowing what will happen next. Along the way, we learn to manage performance anxiety and overcome personal inhibition. And most importantly, we learn to relate to ourselves, to others, to the world around us through our art form. We learn to truly listen and respond to the actor playing opposite us. We learn to become emotionally vulnerable in that moment and to be okay with that. Some of my graduates will go on and become professional actors with varying degrees of economic success. But all of my graduates will go on to be better people. Thoughtful, listening, creative, responsive people. And this is, I believe, one form of economic investment in the planet. Having said that, economic empowerment is in fact a key component in our professional actor training programs. In addition to the technical aspects of actor training, we teach them how to devise their own work, how to draw up a budget, how to source funding, how to market themselves and their work. After all, why should you wait for the agent to call when you can get on with making your own work right now? Most students come to us with a compulsive desire to act and create, but with no business skills whatsoever. Often they have low numeracy skills too. I mean, let's face it, if you're coming into acting, you're not planning to be an accountant. But during their training, we watch their whole perspective shift. They begin to see themselves not just as artists, but also as business people. We challenge the mindset that artists, by definition, must be starving. We don't leave them with any illusion that it will be easy, but we equip them with the skills and knowledge they need to move forward. The Australia Council Women in Theatre report of 2012 highlighted the many issues that women face in the industry, along with all the usual things like taking time out for family. But if a woman leaves CARDA at age 21, equipped with business skills and some foresight into the trajectory that her life may take, she knows how to launch a theatre company or a theatre project at any life stage. She knows how to continue to promote herself and can keep herself visible, even if she steps out of paid work for a time. She knows it will be a juggle, but she is also one step ahead of the next actress who has no idea about these things. She's empowered by knowledge, skills, and the wisdom of elders that have been there before. Economic empowerment of women should and can happen in the arts, as in every other field of endeavour. But there's also one other form of economics I want to touch on. It's the economics of storytelling. Actors and other performers are essentially storytellers, and you might ask, why do we need stories? How can they possibly contribute to our society in any meaningful way? It's true that some stories just entertain us, but others can actually change our lives. And there's some very interesting scientific research out there that says that listening to stories changes the chemicals in our brains, which can then cause changes to our behaviour. For instance, if you hear a story about a girl playing soccer, the parts of your brain that you would use to actually play soccer yourself light up. And it goes on from there. It's my belief that each story we tell and each story we hear adds something more to our souls. Stories have their own economics, their own return on investment. I'm very excited that our first class of musical theatre students will graduate in a week's time, and our first class of advanced diploma students in July. I hope they will take their stories and tell their stories into the Canberra community to enhance it. I'm very hopeful for the impact that these young people may make. And maybe one day, Leanne will join them. More power to her.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Another part of my responsibilities is the Canberra Theatre Centre, so it's great to hear of that fantastic theatre training happening through your academy. Our third speaker is Noor Bloomer, Director of Bloomer's Personal Injury Lawyers and a strong advocate for women and civil liberties. Noor was the former president of the ACT Law Society and is currently Vice President of Civil Liberties Australia. Through organisations like the Law Council of Australia, Noor has promoted draft national model anti-discrimination, anti-sexual harassment and anti-bullying rules. Noor has also made submissions to Parliament on issues such as pay equity and increasing female participation. This strong advocacy and commitment to the community is also reflected in the connections her company has with the community through support for organisations as varied as the Youth Law Centre ACT and the Canberra Roller Derby League. Please join me in welcoming Noor.
Well, thank you for having me, and I also would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people who are the traditional owners of this land on which we are meeting, and pay my respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation, both past and present, and to any Indigenous people here today. Thank you for that introduction. There was a few things in there I didn't quite expect. The roller derby, my husband loves the posters, and it's a fabulous sport for women. In any event, I'd just like to hark back to the first two speakers who are in a more of a creative mould, and I'm very legal. People don't consider as creative. However, I feel it is, and in a way, it's been a way for me and my husband to take an interest in theatre, like we sponsor the CAT Awards and things like that, because we're able to put back in those ways. And we're also forming a theatre company to work on specific projects. So part of wealth is not just being able to feed yourself, but to be able to also put back into the community and involve oneself in the arts if one can. I think scratch a lot of lawyers and you'll find a closet writer or artist or something like that, or actor. And so economic empowerment is a wonderful theme this year, and I think it's really, really important. You won't believe this, but a lot of women lawyers don't do very well in the law. A lot of lawyers don't do well, but there's an unfair representation of women in those lawyers that aren't really making a lot of money. I mean, we all know the image of the rich lawyer. It's usually a man. There's very few women in that category. There is very few women who are partners of law firms. A lot of women are dropping out of the profession, and in fact today I attended the launch of the National Attrition Survey by the Law Council of Australia, and it's quite disturbing results. For instance, it is now the case that 61% of all graduates in law are women. And over the last 10 years, the average is 58%. But our representation is much less than half of men in many senior categories. So I think one of the reasons for that is that when I did law, I was just grateful that I got through and got a law degree, and then I really didn't think about what I needed it for and how I was going to use it. Whereas men are much better at populating the profession in the type of work that makes the most money. And women just don't seem to think that way. And one of the things I do is try and encourage women to think more like that, because there's nothing wrong with being comfortable, and there's nothing wrong with wealth, and there's nothing wrong with wanting those things, because I've been poor and I've been comfortable, and I much prefer the latter. As my grandfather used to say, money doesn't buy you happiness, but happiness doesn't buy you money either. And I think that most of us appreciate the freedom, as you've said, the freedom that money gives you to actually not be worried about your childcare, or not be concerned about whether you can buy a pair of shoes or something to eat that night. That is a freedom that a lot of people don't have, and I certainly am an advocate for doing that and not being ashamed to do it. It is well known that women as lawyers were late entrants to the profession, and we were up against it from the start. And just to give you a little bit of history, in 1979 I asked my then future father-in-law, and I was very young then, he asked me, he said, "Oh, what are you going to do with yourself? You know, with your life?" He was a lawyer in the country, and I said, I wanted to be a lawyer. And he said, "Oh, women can't do law." And that was 1979. In the late 1940s, his own father, who was a lawyer, when his daughter asked if she could study law, gave her the same answer, and she was not allowed to study law, and even though women did in those days, but they were pioneers. In 1982, I moved from Perth with my husband to Griffith, New South Wales, where his family was from, to become a student of law by correspondence. And I had to fill out forms to become a student at law. You had to get permission in those days. And all the forms were filled out as him, his, her, his and Mr. And I had to handwrite all the changes to the form to get through. And these are very common stories. We both worked and studied full-time. We worked full-time and studied, and along the way in Griffith we had 4 children. And we were broke for many years, but it was worth it in the long run. And as I said, when I became a lawyer finally in '92, I was so exhausted by the process, I was just couldn't think straight. But I was fortunate in that I became a litigation lawyer because that was what was needed in the firm at the time. And certain areas of litigation are profitable and certain are not. So, for instance, if you're doing all legal aid, criminal law and family law work, that doesn't make a lot of money. Personal injury work and commercial work was always more lucrative. And what I learnt finally was that in the more lucrative area of the law, there were very few women. They were all huddled in the poor end. And so I thought, you know, maybe I should be a bit smarter about this and think about what I'm going to do. We then moved to, in 1998, I became the first ever female partner of a law firm in the Riverina Law Society. This may seem ridiculous, but it was a fact. There was just all blokes. And there are several now, which was good. But for other reasons, we left Griffith and New South Wales in 98 and came to Canberra. We chose Canberra. We thought we had 4 children to educate, and we thought we were going to go to Sydney, and we thought, oh my gosh, if you go to Sydney, where are you going to work, where are you going to live, how are you going to afford it, how would that all work? And the thought of somebody suggested Canberra, and we thought, what a relief, what a beautiful city, almost like a big country town. And indeed it has been very, very good to us. And we have found here a wonderful community. Not just the community, but also the legal community is a very close and supportive one, if you're on the right side of them. Most of them are lovely. So I came here to the big metropolis and I looked forward to a more chick-friendly legal community, but I got a bit of a shock. One firm I had dealings with said that I found out they'd never had a woman work for them, and that was because they didn't want them. And when I looked around, there were a lot of firms that had no women working for them, and I don't think there are many left, but that was the case for many years. And I'm not talking a long time ago here. In about 1999, I was in the ACT Supreme Court, and a young woman colleague of mine was was in court saying something, and the judge said to her, you're playing in the first 11 now, and so he used a cricket term to point out to her that she should, raise her sights a little. Cricketing and football terms are very common in the legal profession, and I've found over the years that it's been good to take a bit of interest in rugby union so that I can chat, to the guys about stuff, you see. And these anecdotes are background as to why I felt, notwithstanding my own good fortunes in my career and my great colleagues, both male and female, that young women entering the profession felt less welcome, less than accepted, and the second-class citizens of the legal profession. Our law firm still gets letters from other firms addressed to Messrs. Bloomers. Now, that Messrs, those of you who don't know, is the plural of Misters. And that's quite common, and that still happens today. There is an assumption that all lawyers, male partners of law firms, are men, and it's just plainly rude. On to, quickly, financial risk-taking. Another thing I encourage women to do in our profession is, I think one of the reasons why women don't get ahead is because they are afraid to take risks. We are naturally conservative creatures. We don't want to go into debt. We don't want to make gambles. Whereas if you notice, a lot of my male colleagues are very happy to do that on a regular basis. And one of the reasons is they can take failure. I think it's from playing a lot of sport or something. But if they lose a case or something goes wrong or their business folds or whatever, they mostly just pick themselves up, dust themselves off and go on to the next thing and forget about it. Whereas I am afraid of failure, and I think many of us as women are. Well, I've run out of time. And I've got lots of tips I give to women lawyers, and one of them is always look after other women in your professional life. And a quote from Madeleine Albright I heard today was that there's a special hell for women who don't look after other women. And I might just leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noor. I love that last quote. Thank you for those insights into the law and the challenges and opportunities that women face in the legal profession. And I do love that idea that if you scratch a lawyer, there's an artist underneath. Well, our fourth speaker is a bit of a renaissance woman. Tammy Vendange is the new Chief Executive Officer at the RSPCA ACT, so congratulations to Tammy on that new role. Prior to that, Tammy's career had been wide-ranging, to say the least. Tammy's worked for NASA. She's been a United States Air Force officer and a Peace Corps volunteer in Africa. She's also worked for a number of information technology companies. She's owned 3 companies and has founded 2 not-for-profit organisations. In her new role at the RSPCA, Tammy has 3 goals: improving staff morale, financial sustainability, and building and eventually occupying a new site for the RSPCA in Symonston. In addition to all of this, in her spare time, and I can't imagine there is much spare time, Tammy has represented Australia on the national Dragon Boat team. Please join me in welcoming Tammy.
Well, I reckon after all the publicity I've had lately, you're probably pretty sick of seeing me. My staff was giving me a hard time about that today, saying, one more newspaper. So I said, don't worry, I don't believe it. I can relate, though, to the previous speaker's challenges of working in an all-male environment coming from the IT sector. In fact, I was heavily involved in Women in IT organization called WIC for a long time because of that. And I've gone from an organization where I've had being the only woman in a room for a lot of meetings to now where 90% of my staff are women. And that has been really eye-opening to go back into an environment like that where I actually have to worry about my men, not feeling like the minority. So that's actually kind of interesting. So on this day where we're speaking about ending poverty for women and girls through economic empowerment, I'd like to say that I want to start with 3 stories about how I think education is that empowerment vehicle. And the first story is very personal. So I grew up in a small town. I'm in charge of this too. Oh, good. So I grew up in a small ski resort town in eastern New Mexico called Ruidoso. It was the closest ski area to West Texas. So we all talk like this. And basically, a good season for us meant that we got snow. When we had a bad season, it meant that it was pretty dire straits there. We depended completely on tourism. My mother was mostly a cook. My father had odd jobs. He was doing anything from being a servo and teller or construction worker or just whatever he could find at the time. And one bad season in particular, I remember, both of them were laid off at the same time. And unlike here, they didn't have any kind of redundancy packages, no matter how long you've worked for them. So both of my parents were without jobs. I was about 9 years old. And in the US back then, they would actually give you paper stamps if you're on welfare to buy food. So you'd go into a grocery store and you would exchange the paper stamps for food. And I remember the first time we had to do this, and we went in there to buy groceries, and I was standing there with my mother. And I could see the face of that teller who was checking us out. And it was a face of condemnation, looking at us as though my parents must be lazy to get us into this position of being poor. And I was embarrassed. I was completely embarrassed, thinking, I never want to be poor again. And it was at that time in my life where I made a decision, because even though my parents had no education, my mom went to probably 6th grade because she was one of 9 kids and the oldest daughter in the Philippines. My father, just basic high school education, no university education or any training after that. They had always told me how if I actually studied hard and got a good job, then I would be able to get out of this situation. And so when I had that experience, I decided at that age I was never going to be poor again. So I worked my tail off, and at age 18 I became financially independent. I supported myself through uni and eventually got an MBA as well. And I became the first person in my entire family to get a college education. So for me, I ended the cycle of poverty. My brother followed right behind me and ended up with a bachelor's and a master's degree as well. And that was through education that I was able to find my empowerment. That was very personal. The next slide As I said here, change slide. The next story I want to share with you is more of a witness, although I was definitely involved in this as well. When, probably about 1999, I joined the Peace Corps. And this is a program that was set up by the US State Department back when John F. Kennedy was president. And he believed that we needed to go into third world countries, because I'm originally from the US, obviously, go into third world countries and actually help them out. And we did this through various programs. Now, I was stationed at the Cape Verde Islands on the eastern coast of Senegal. And here was just a number of different islands, and I had a very unique job that's not a typical Peace Corps job, where I was asked to be the advisor for the governor of the island around investment in tourism projects. So I had a white-collar job, which is quite unusual. But I was doing that. I was really frustrated because Cape Verdeans are the sweetest people ever, but they are not entrepreneurs. They just don't have it in them. So mainland Africans, mostly from Nigeria, would come over to the islands, and they would bring all their wares with them from Nigeria, and they would sell it to all the European tourists that would flock there because of our fantastic beaches, just beautiful beaches. And the Cape Verdeans would just look around going, why am I poor? So I decided to do something about it, and although it wasn't part of my job description, I started an entrepreneurship club with high school students. And with those kids, I taught them business classes, and then we'd spend the second half of each session making jewelry that they would find, that they would use from shells that they'd find or other natural materials. And I used a little grant to help us get to that point. And through that process, I had a number of kids that didn't even know how to use a mouse when we started. By the way, using solitaire is a great way to teach how to use a mouse. But eventually, through all that time, and eventually I had to move on, but 3 of those students that I worked with got actual scholarships to study abroad at universities. One of them would have never had that opportunity had she not studied with me for a while. So they used the education that I provided to make opportunities for them for additional education. And now they are able to end the cycle within their own families and communities because they have this education now that they brought back with them when they moved back to Cape Verde. My third one, as most relevant, obviously, to what I do today, is about our inspectorate at the RSPCA here in Canberra. Now, a lot of people recognize our logo and they know what we do, but the core mission of this organization when it was set up was to prevent cruelty to animals. That's our core mission. And the very first thing they did was set up an inspectorate type organization where they would investigate any complaints or concerns where they thought that an animal was being harmed or being neglected. And we have a very small team because it's just one of those difficult things to do when we don't actually have direct public funding for this part of the organization. We have a very small team that does this here for Canberra, and we are the only ones that do this for Canberra. And unlike what you see on television, which sounds really cool, like you have the police walk in there, they shut down the doors, you know, they run out there, they grab the animal, they take them out, and then they rescue them, right? That's what you see on TV. 95% of our events have nothing to do like that. Instead, our inspectors spend most of their time educating people. Why? Because the majority of the complaints come from people, our families, that live in public housing. Most of these individuals have their own issues with things like mental health, drug addictions, alcohol addictions. Most of them don't know what normal looks like. And therefore, as much as they love that animal, they may not know what to do when something changes in their financial situation. Sometimes the animal is sick and they don't have money for a vet bill. Sometimes they have a child that had to go into prison and therefore no one's there to look after the pet. Sometimes the animal's losing weight and they don't know why they're feeding it, and they can't figure it out. Lots of times our inspectors go in there and find out the people aren't being cruel to the animals. Most of them would give up their own meals to take care of that animal. The fact is that they just don't know how to get help for it. And so our inspectors spend time with them trying to understand their story, and they recognize that the best place for that animal is actually with the family. Why? Because if you bring us an animal that has ringworm, we can't do anything with that animal. Why? Because it could spread so quickly across the entire kennels. And suddenly we have not just one animal infected, but the entire kennel. And then we have to put down a lot of animals because of that infection. Same thing with other viruses and diseases. But if that individual that owns that pet can get a treatment for it through a veterinarian, they can serve that treatment to that animal there. They can administer that to them there. And they can help that one animal, and that family can stay together. You know, when I'm talking about family here, those animals are just a part of the family as anyone else. And sometimes we treat them like children. Some of them don't even have children. Some of them have nothing but these animals. And it helps their mental state as well. So our job with the inspectorate is 95% of the time, it's education. And we do our best to educate them and let them know what we can do for them when they don't have that. So three stories about how education can empower people.
Thank you, Tammy. I think we can see that it's quite an unusual career path that's brought you to your current role, but the RSPCA has made an excellent choice. The only thing I could find in common was mice. Our final speaker for the first session, and the one best known to me personally, is Susie Beaver. Susie is the director of Beaver Galleries with her husband Martin. She's been running Beaver Galleries for 22 years. This is Canberra's largest commercial gallery and exhibits the work of contemporary Australian artists working in a variety of media. Susie's love of the arts developed while she was at university, and she began her career working as a project officer with the Australia Council. She went on to work for a number of arts organisations, both in Australia and overseas, before moving to Canberra. Beaver Galleries represents a number of significant local female artists, some with works in the CMAG collection, including Anita McIntyre, G.W. Bott, and Wendy Teakle. In fact, those three artists were the focus of a beautiful exhibition we had here at CMAG a couple of years ago, Marking Place, an exhibition about landscapes and the poetics of place. Please join me in welcoming Susie.
I'll give you the seat. Great, thank you. So I want to start by thanking Canberra Museum and Gallery for inviting me to be a part of this event. I feel rather overwhelmed at being included with such an interesting and diverse group of extraordinary women. And indeed, when I started to think about my presentation to you today, I wondered why I had been invited. My husband Martin and I run and own Beaver Galleries in Deakin. We work with many talented and extraordinary contemporary Australian artists from Canberra and around Australia. The artists we represent work in many different mediums: paintings, prints, ceramics, glass, jewellery and sculpture. When Sophie mentioned that we could have a PowerPoint, I could think of nothing better than you being distracted away from my little talk to look at the selection of beautiful and diverse artworks made by some of the fantastic women artists that we are lucky enough to work with. We've limited the images tonight to those of women artists, only simply due to the nature of this event. It is by no means making a statement about the art of our male artists. So if you get bored, or even if you don't, enjoy the creativity of our artists being shown behind me. Thank you. We were asked to give a little bit of a background about our lives, so here is mine. I have had a most fortunate life, growing up in a loving family of 3 sisters, and extraordinarily warm, intelligent and caring parents. My parents followed contemporary Australian art, and this is back in the 60s, and bought the odd piece when they could. And our home was regularly filled with music, as my father played the piano and had studied music at university. Both my parents worked hard, with my mother also going out to work to allow us to have a good as education as possible that they could afford, often sacrificing things for themselves to educate their 3 daughters, which was their highest priority. It was from them I learnt the rewards of hard work, the joy of the arts in all its forms, the belief that you can do anything you set your mind to, and that your life is what you make of it. My mother's side of the family was full of inspiring women. My great-aunt, whom I was lucky enough to know for many years, was a colonel in the British Army, spending years in the Middle East looking after women troops. My great-grandmother was one of 16 children born in a very small town in outback South Australia, and then she also decided to foster 4 other children. So with these inspiring women to live up to, as well as my mother and my grandmother, and armed with an excellent education, I began to travel after my university degree was complete. As far as work was concerned, as Harriet mentioned, I started my professional life at 22, working in arts administration at the Australia Council in Sydney, the federal funding body for the arts. As a project officer with music, visual and community arts boards, I was involved in meeting artists and arts organisations and assisting them in applying for government funds, working with a board of amazing professional artists and business people in assessing applications for funding. I also made the tea and coffee when necessary, which was pretty much every day. It was a fantastic first full-time job, which again allowed me to travel, this time throughout Australia, and to meet and assist a wide range of artists working in many disciplines. I spent 6 or 7 years working on and off with the Australia Council, learning about the arts, taking leave without pay, every couple of years to travel back to Europe. And there, some years later, I met my husband Martin, never realising that we would be married and running an art gallery in Canberra many years later. So I guess one way or the other, my life fell into the arts, and from there I have loved it ever since. So that's the quick version of the first 30 years of my life. Then comes Canberra. We moved to Canberra in 1992 with a 3-month-old child, having bought a business we really knew nothing about, and an idealistic view that if we could spend 6 months travelling together before we got married, combine Martin's law and commerce background, my arts background, and both our love of the arts, then we could certainly run a business together and raise children, too. How naive, but ultimately how true that was. For the first 15 months in Canberra, I pretty much cried every day. So sad to leave friends and family in Sydney, and like many of us, thinking we wouldn't be staying here for very long. Not only were we learning how to run a business, we were also learning how to be parents as well. Furthermore, 7 months later, I was pregnant with our second child, and that probably helped all the tears come back as well. I could talk much to you about the complexity of running an art gallery. I often think of that lovely analogy of the duck gliding over the mill pond with the feet flapping frantically below the surface. I imagine that applies to a lot of us here tonight. One needs for our job, or my job, and in no particular order, a good vision of the art that you want to show, the ability to identify and find good art, an excellent business acumen, great staff, a terrific building, a good work ethic, fantastic artists to work with, patience, selling skills, listening skills, wrapping skills, flat shoes, tea and coffee making skills, networking skills, counselling skills, believe it or not, empathy, etc., etc. But most importantly, a belief in what we are doing and a passion for the work of the artists we are representing. When I thought specifically about our work with artists, both men and women, it made me focus on how lucky we are in what we do. Each artist is effectively their own micro-business, so every commercial gallery supports many small businesses stay afloat, as long as the gallery that they work with can sell the work on behalf of the artists. The artists in turn support their family, and so it goes on. This gives galleries a great responsibility. Not only do you delight for the client when you see their pleasure in purchasing a piece of art that strikes a chord with them, but you also know you're helping an artist with their business whilst covering some of your costs too. It's a great feeling, and nothing is better than telling an artist that another sale has been made for them and that their work connected with a buyer. Our gallery represents many interesting women artists, and in fact, when I did my figures last night, I realised that 62% of the artists that we show are women, a figure that surprised me at first. It made me wonder why. Was it just that we preferred the work of women artists? Was it just that more women choose to be artists than men? Was it just that women make better art than men? Oh, I don't think there are many men here, so that's good. I can't answer that question, but it did make me consider the economic viability of being an artist. When I Googled artists and poverty, I found there's an organisation in the US called ASTEP, Artists Striving to End Poverty, which uses the arts as a tool to empower young, disadvantaged artists with creativity, knowledge, and a strong sense of self-esteem, factors which help them advance their lives and communities. In Australia, the Australia Council report into the poverty of artists in 2000 found that 1/3 of all artists live below the poverty line. Half earned less than $7,300 from their art per annum, and only 12% were working full-time in a job that married their passions. Artists regularly need to augment their art practice through teaching, waitressing, taxi driving, and many other casual jobs. We still have much to do in enabling artists to flourish in a full-time practice without the concerns of making ends meet. Of course, we meet many inspiring women through our gallery, and I just want to share a couple of journeys with you. Cristina Cordero is a printmaker who has shown with our gallery for many years. Cristina was born in Chile, but she had to flee that country with her child in 1973 during the Pinochet regime. Christine then, she was a sociologist and an academic at the University of Santiago, and so was her husband. When Christina arrived in Australia, she decided to give up her academic life and she studied painting and printmaking, and in 1990 she received her Diploma of Fine Arts in the National Art School in Sydney. Her work's characterised by free association of ideas and interwoven narratives, and often features small boats with women on board. She's an artist with great humility and a pleasure to work with. Lucy Rickard is a young Tasmanian artist who is currently showing at our gallery. Her work is extraordinary, is marked by a sharp eye for detail, zealous imagination, and a fastidious, often obsessive mode of execution. Her images are quite large and hauntingly beautiful, and she uses graphite, just lead pencil, on drafting film. Her story with us is a lovely one. Martin went to Hobart some years ago and went to a few little-known student art shows. He saw her exquisite works and tracked her down to a cafe where she worked as a waitress. We first showed her drawings in a group show, sold all the works, then in a solo show. Again, the sales were great. And last year, we took her work to the inaugural Sydney Contemporary Art Fair, where all 4 of her large works sold in the first day of the fair. That fair involved 80 of the best galleries from Australia and around the world, so it was stiff competition indeed. Without touting our gallery, just go and see her drawings. They're simply amazing, and obviously her journey continues. And finally, who could not fail to be inspired by Canberra sculptor and legend Jan Brown? She's an extraordinary woman. At the age of 92, she continues to still work most days, and I know CMAG has a wonderful collection of her works. Of her work, Jan said that it is incidental to a lifetime journey, seeing, learning, knowing, and making. So what better job could I have but mine? I know my life will always be full of extraordinary artists, and if we can only just do a little to support them in their careers, I know it will be more than worthwhile.
Thank you so much, Susie. And I should say that from personal knowledge, I'm aware that Susie's a very important figure in the ACT arts scene and always gives very generously of her time and her resources to support the arts sector, particularly up-and-coming artists. Well, we are on time, so thank you to our first 5 speakers for being so disciplined and setting a good example for the next 5 speakers. But we do conclude our first session here with such inspiring stories. I'm sure there'll be lots to talk about during our short break. Please join us back in the foyer for a light supper, and please be prompt returning here at 7:05. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome, thank you for being on time. We're going to begin the second session by hearing from a woman who's committed to advancing the careers of other women. Deborah May is the director of the May Group and Advancing Women. The May Group assists organisations to harness the talent and skills of all employees. It focuses on supporting businesses to develop an inclusive, diverse and gender-balanced workplace. It has a mission to change limiting mindsets, behaviours and practices, and in so doing, create opportunities for everyone to participate, contribute and achieve their individual and collective potential. I'm particularly drawn to Deborah's observation that what works for women works for everyone. Please welcome Deborah.
Good evening. I also would like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge the other women here tonight, both those on the panel and those in the room. International Women's Day provides an opportunity for us to reflect on ourselves and each other and our accomplishments as diverse and as broad and as powerful as they can be. It's interesting to me also to observe, as I'm listening tonight, that I know a number of the women on the panel, and to me that's just evidence that I've actually been in Canberra for quite some time and possibly am a Canberran. This year is the 20th anniversary of me leaving a well-paid job in a high-profile company, and it's a great opportunity to reflect on what has emerged for me as a consequence of that decision. In 1994, I resigned from my secure job at IBM, here in Canberra at the time. I sold my house and many of my things when I was a single mother with a 4-year-old, with only a vague plan about what to do next. I'd won a Fulbright scholarship after thinking about what I could do. However, once I won it, I was then wondering what I would do. I didn't know where I was going to study or exactly what was going to come from it, but I knew that I needed to leave. That decision to leave IBM at that time, well-paid job and a secure position, caused a lot of consternation and indeed anger for some. I remember this guy coming up to me one time at some farewell do and pointing his finger at me and said, "What are you doing? You cannot do this." I said, "I'm sorry?" And he said, "What do you think you're doing? You're a mother, you've got responsibilities, you have to stay in this job." I was quite taken aback. I hadn't thought that my decision would affect anyone other than me and my son perhaps, but clearly it was affecting him. My decision caused consternation for others, but it was actually a relief for me. I left IBM because after some very difficult years and a few despairing months, I realised that something was going on in that workplace and indeed the workplaces of other organisations I worked with that made it difficult for me and other women. And that was not because there was something wrong with me, although for a while I thought there was. It was because there was something wrong with the organisation, their practices, their norms, their culture that created a divergence of opportunity for men and women, especially those with family. As Noor has also said, it hasn't changed a lot. I've been doing the work I've been doing now for almost 15 years, and in that time there has been some progress, but not a lot. So whilst there has been some opportunities gained, some progress made for women and our organisations, there is still something to do. I took my son to live on a farm, and so began a personal journey that started with nothing more than a desire for time and space to connect with me and my boy, and led ultimately to the work I'm doing now. After 18 months, Sam and I went to Boston. For almost 3 years I lived there, where I studied at a little-known business school designed for women, the only one in the world of its kind, Simmons School of Management. And I also worked in a diversity consulting firm. I learned more than the curriculum when I was there, and much of what I learned informs my business, my thinking, and my practice today. I learned that ambition is not a dirty word. The desire to make a difference and contribute to something I care about passionately is important, and as important as it is to the women we've heard today. And I think that's quite striking. You know, the work that we do is aligned with our passion and commitment. It is important. But I also want to be successful. I want to be good at what I do and be recognised for what I do. I am ambitious, and this ambition means that I continue to strive to be more and more successful. For me, this means working with some of the country's most senior leaders in the corporate and public sector. It means having the opportunity to influence outcomes and thinking in a way that can be leveraged and create change for others. For me, it means being recognised for succeeding in the job I do, not just doing the job. Another thing I learned is that money is not something to be scared of. Indeed, it's a measure of success, as well as a means to an end. Too many women are nervous around money. Too many of us undervalue our skills, our experience and contribution, and that's convenient for many who can and do take advantage of it. But it also contributes, as we heard at the beginning, to too many women not having enough superannuation and too many women being paid less than their male colleagues. We can all get better acquainted with money. We can all be better at acknowledging our value and, when you're in business, charging for it. Another thing I learned from my American friends and colleagues and peers was that it's okay to speak up, even when what you have to say makes others or indeed yourself feel uncomfortable. That discomfort comes perhaps from voicing a different opinion or asking for something you need, asking for help, asking to put something right. I loved the debate and the forthright discussions that took place in my classes, that took place around the tables that I was part of in the evenings with the friends that I spent my evenings with. When I go back to Boston, I love hearing women with opinions speak up, be heard, and say what they think, regardless of whether I agree or not, and quite often I don't. There are a lot of things I love to hear. I love to hear the voices of women with opinions. I know that sometimes when I first got over there, I was thinking, when I was listening to a lot of my American colleagues speak in a very forthright way, how unfamiliar and uncomfortable it was at first. However, over time, I learnt how refreshing it was, how important it was to have a voice and to make their ideas count. I think in Australia, many of us have been painted by the brush of our English forebears and silenced by cultural expectations that women need to be nice, think about others first, and that means quite often, too many of us get walked over. For us to contribute and participate fully, we need to get better at speaking up on behalf of ourselves and the things that we care about. Whilst I was over there, I also learned a whole lot of things that are useful in my practice and that I've developed over 15 years working in this space. And that includes how and why organisations work better for men than they do for women. It's not malicious, it's not intentional, it just is. And the more aware we are of the cultural, gendered and organisational dynamics that work to advantage of men, the more successfully we can manage and navigate those dynamics. I've also come to realise, and indeed spent a lot of my time now helping others recognise, that their minds are very well trained to think in certain ways. Those ways don't always serve us well or help us achieve the very best outcomes. Our thoughts, our beliefs, our behaviours are shaped by messages we've internalised through a lifetime of experiences. They differ according to our cultural and ethnic backgrounds, the education we've had, the families we've been raised in, and they inform our choices and inform who we think we are, how we think we should be, how we should dress, what our options should be, how we should relate to others, all the shoulds in our heads that are informed by these messages. Those messages confuse us into thinking that the way that we see the world is the only way the world is, and those thoughts can often constrain us. We've heard tonight from a number of women who have seen what's possible, who have followed their dreams and their convictions, who have, I think, moved beyond the stories that often constrain us. One of the things I encourage all women to do is to pay attention to how and what they think, because I've learned we're only constrained by what we think is possible or not.
Thank you, Deborah. Inspiring words there, I think, for all of us. Our next speaker is Yanni Meyer. Yanni's, in fact, our second speaker tonight, who's a recipient of the ACT Women's Microcredit Programme, Brilliant Ideas. She runs her own business, EnviroLove, an organisation that seeks to promote sustainability and recycling, particularly through commercial food waste recycling. Yanni originally moved to Canberra to study pure mathematics at the Australian National University, and the idea for her business was sparked by establishing a worm farm on the balcony of the apartment that she rented. Yanni still considers herself a bit of a maths nerd, but I'm sure this will stand her in good stead with her business goal of helping the commercial sector to reduce its environmental footprint in an efficient and economical way, benefiting both the industry and our environment. Please join me in welcoming Yanni.
Good evening, everyone. So first of all, just thanks. I was very touched to be invited to speak here tonight, and certainly very inspired by the theme of International Women's Week to do with economic empowerment and, allowing women to go from, living to survive to something beyond that. So what I wanted to share about for my 10 minutes was more how EnviroLove came about, because I can tell you when I moved to Canberra in 2009, it was certainly not on the cards. It wasn't even in my imagination or anything like that. So to start with, I just want to go back to when I was a little girl. And there was these two things in particular from my childhood that was sort of always bubbling away that now links to EnviroLove. So firstly, I grew up on a beautiful property, and it's like acres of just natural bush. There's no cleared land, there was no grazing, no farming, no poisons or chemicals on the property. It was just beautiful bush. And so me and my three sisters, that was our playground. We'd be going down to the creeks and playing with sticks and stones rather than Barbie dolls, and I play a good game of cricket with a rock and a twig. So through this kind of childhood, we really grew an appreciation of the environment and of nature that surrounded us just as a natural way of being. And so my whole family, day to day, we would just do things that were in line with our beautiful environment, such as composting. So, we'd compost all our food and then it would go onto the veggie patches. And, and just taking care of the land. And, we had a lot of bitty bush, which is certainly a weed in Australia, but there was no way we were going to poison it. We'd be getting down there and pulling it out by hand ourselves. So the second thing growing up was my father always had his own business ever since I was born. And I remember him telling myself and my sisters on many occasions about the opportunity of having your own business and how you could really design your life through a business that you ran. So, these two experiences amongst many always stuck with me. So, fast forward many years later, I'm 22 years old and I've just moved to Canberra to start my PhD in theoretical mathematics. And that's certainly worlds away from anything to do with the environment and anything to do with business. I mean, what it looked like was I'd get to my office and I'd have a bunch of paper and I'd write down little abstract symbols and then go and maybe talk to someone over coffee with it, come back and maybe read a textbook and then write a little bit more, and then maybe type it up if something was working. So that was, you know, what my day-to-day looked like doing a PhD in mathematics. Now, so how did EnviroLove come about? Well, I moved to Canberra with a colleague of mine. I guess we'd done our undergraduate in mathematics, our whole study, and we rented this apartment together. And because of my childhood being amongst nature and the environment, of course we had to recycle everything. And I was fanatical about recycling, and there was no way food scraps were going to go into the landfill bin. So it's like, well, what do we do? There's no garden. And that's how the worm farm suddenly appeared on our balcony, and we put all our food scraps into that. And anyway, this opened up a conversation of, well, we just moved to Canberra. What does Canberra do in general with their food waste? So I picked up the phone, and I think I rang nearly every single shopping centre in Canberra to ask them what they did with their food waste. And most of them said, oh, well, we don't do anything, and we probably should, but, that we don't have any means to be able to do that. And so that sparked the idea, okay, well, maybe we'll be the ones to give them that access to recycle their food waste. And that's how the idea of EnviroLove started. But, it was just an idea at this point. And when you think about it, here's these two, people going into mathematics, early 20s. I had no experience in business whatsoever except for the few words from my father, and we'd had multiple business ideas before that had never come into fruition. So what was the difference here? Well, when I look back now, I think what the biggest difference was that I was really straight with myself and was like, I don't know anything about creating or starting a business whatsoever. So that only left one thing to do, which was to find out. So that's what I did, and there's been multiple key and pivotal programs or moments that have then led from me being a complete newbie to actually being able to create a business in the ACT. So, a couple of those are, for example, I joined a program called Innovation ACT, which was for ANU students, so it was great being an ANU student, I could do that. And this program had a bunch of business seminars, so you could learn the nitty-gritty about business. And also there was an opportunity to win funding at the end, and you also got a mentor. So I remember one morning I had a meeting with a person called Sam Prince. If you haven't heard of him, he started Canberra and many other amazing initiatives. So I spent this hour with him, and I remember my whole perspective of business just shifting in that conversation. I really walked into that meeting with, the logical mathematical mind, oh, we'll do this and then we'll get this machine to take care of that processing and then this will come, And then suddenly in this conversation, this whole world of branding and the story your business could share and what was the magic of your business going to be about opened up. And so suddenly this whole world of business was alive for me and, exciting, it was creative. And so that really was certainly a key moment in EnviroLove. So, I began to lap up all the things I could about running a business and starting a business, and that led to getting amazing feedback and advice and support from many people like Anna Pino, who's going to speak soon, and others, and and led to funding and grants and that financial contribution that we really needed to start the business. And of course, as mentioned, the brilliant idea ACT microcredit program for women, which not only gave a great boost in terms of its interest-free loans, but certainly the advice and the support that I got from that went way beyond the financial contribution. So that's what it took, really immersing myself in this world of business that I was really unfamiliar with, and I guess putting my heart on my sleeve that I might be dismissed at any moment by people who are way more experienced in it, and really taking on the world of resources and advice and people out there that could breathe life into this business idea that I had. So EnviroLove came about into the world, and it stayed, and it's still sharing not only its environmental services to the commercial sector, but also, you know, I love that people get excited about it. I think that's like one of my favourite things about EnviroLove, that people get excited that there's something that links people with sustainability, and you know, that it's funky, and it's really, you know, promoting that message of the environment and people contributing to sustainability. So, you know, I guess to finish up my 10 minutes, you know, I was really standing in the face of like no business experience, certainly no capital whatsoever, and a set of circumstances that would not normally lead to someone creating and starting a business. But, you know, through the support that was out there in the ACT in particular, allowed me to, you know, take this idea in my hot little hands and actually turn it into something. And you know, that's what I'll take away with me for like the next opportunity that will come along and that I'll be part of. And so that's what I want to leave everyone with, is that possibility and that opportunity of creating what you want to see out there in the world and in reality, standing in the face of anything. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Yanni, and I think that's a great example of a business based on thinking globally but acting locally. Well, we're up to speaker number 8, and our next speaker is Sarah Carlson. She's one of the 3 co-founders of Fivefold Studio in the very hipster Lonsdale Street Traders. Sarah's a jeweller from rural New South Wales. She studied gold and silversmithing at the ANU. And at the age of just 24, she's established a business representing 22 emerging artists from around Australia. Fivefold is both a jewellery gallery and a workshop. The 3 contemporary jewellers behind the business have a vision to support emerging contemporary jewellers by providing both a gallery space and access to workbenches. This is one of those embarrassing technological moments. Back to Fivefold Jewellers. They're going beyond this vision to offer classes in jewellery making, which is a great opportunity for people to gain a new appreciation of the skill behind each handmade object. Great, we're uninterrupted, so please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Thank you, and before I start, I'd just like to thank all the women here who have paved the way for people like myself and my 2 business partners. I'm certain that you've broken many boundaries that make what we do today possible. So last year, I commenced and launched into starting a creative business with my 2 business partners, Danica Van Buren and Ingrid Lockley. Our aim was to provide support for emerging contemporary jewellers in Canberra and help them develop and build a sustainable practice. All 3 of us had studied gold and silversmithing at the ANU School of Art, and since graduating had spent time exploring various methods of developing a fulfilling and sustainable arts practice in Canberra. What was missing for me, and I dare say for each of us, was a sense of direction due to a feeling of lack of community around the gold and silversmithing in Canberra. Many of our fellow students had not continued making after graduating, and those who did continued doing so in other cities beyond Canberra, which seemed to be more exciting and more supportive. In April last year, we held a 3-week pop-up exhibition which allowed us to showcase our jewellery in the hip and happening Lonsdale Street Traders. Our pop-up exhibition we named Fivefold, as it represented the work of 5 emerging female jewellers who were determined to make a go of it here in Canberra. The response was completely overwhelming. With over 300 people attending our opening and over 1,000 people attending our 3-week short-term exhibition, we felt like we had truly made it. People were paying attention to our scene and they were more than willing to support us. As fate had it, at the conclusion of the exhibition, a more permanent space became available within the Lonsdale Street Traders. That was it. There was no stopping us. In June, we signed a lease, collected the keys to our door, and the hard work began. We gave ourselves 1 month to build everything in our shop. We built the plinths, the workbenches, we painted the entire space, we scrubbed the old car grease off the concrete floors, doing all this whilst managing our full-time jobs. We used more power tools, spent more time at Bunnings, and ate more pizza than I generally dare to admit to. We went through 1 month of working 14-hour days relentlessly 7 days a week to turn what was our empty shell into a dynamic workshop and gallery space, and it paid off. We were determined to support our fellow makers and, importantly, to present their ideas to the Canberra community. To do this, we set 5 aims for ourselves, which we strive to achieve on a daily basis with a long-term vision. These aims are empowerment, visibility, support, awareness, and engagement. At the heart of what we wanted to achieve was to empower our fellow emerging makers by providing access to essential tools and workbenches so that makers could develop and diversify their skills. In our experience, the opportunity to work alongside fellow makers enriched and challenged our individual making skills and ideas. So we set out on setting up a workshop. The workshop that we set up has 5 benches, which provides permanent access to 5 tenants, and 4 benches which are available for short-term access to casual makers within Canberra. This allows for cross-cultivation and collaboration of ideas, which is essential to any creative career. The workshop has become a much adored and visited hub by our artists and plays a central role in ensuring that our artists have a base from which they can continue to develop. At the same time that we set up the workshop, we set up a gallery space to showcase the finished jewels that were being made in our workshop, in workshops across Canberra and workshops across Australia. We understood that gallery spaces are often as intimidating for the general public to enter as starting a making career can be for an emerging designer. Therefore, all the work in our gallery is on display is there to be interacted with. We did not put in a single glass cabinet. We wanted people to experience the joy or confrontation of interacting with jewellery that is made with alternative materials and alternative design solutions. Jewellery that often forces you to stop and reconsider the role that it can play as a wearable art form and the message it will carry with you as the wearer. We were also acutely aware of the difficulties in developing a sustainable and profitable arts-based practice. As Susie earlier touched on, successful arts practices require a dedication of knowledge, skills, and time equal to running a small business. To support our artists in this venture, we developed a mentoring program. Each artist represented in Fivefold Studio is assigned a mentor from the Fivefold team. This mentorship includes giving them advice about their tax and insurance obligations and how to best fulfill them, as well as the best way to price their work and ensure that not only are they covering their costs, but they're paying themselves for their time, which is something that rarely happens in our industry. We also bring attention to the grants that are available for our artists and ensure that they follow through where we think that it is appropriate for our individual makers. Having said all of this, we're also very aware that what we do is potentially obscure and left of field, and we don't expect that everybody who comes into our gallery understands what it is that we do, but we want to give them the tools to do so. So we specifically set up our workshop and gallery side by side, where you can see the workshop in action whenever you visit our gallery. What this does is it puts on display the ancient tools that we're using, the ancient techniques, and the wonderful community and hive that we've created within Fivefold. It allows our audience to engage with and understand the dynamics of a gold and silversmithing workshop and tears down any barriers of misunderstanding. Additionally to our visible workshop, this year we launched classes for the general public. At the beginning, this allows for people to go behind the scenes into the workshop and learn about the practices of gold and silversmithing. Our current classes run for 1 day, and in that 1 day, you walk away with a silver ring which you have made, but so much more. You walk away with an understanding and a new appreciation for the handmade and specifically for the skill and work that goes into the jewellery represented in our gallery. Whilst Fivefold Studio is actively engaged in encouraging the growth and network of emerging designers having finished their studies, we are also actively engaged in supporting current students. This semester, I will be giving a presentation at the ANU Gold and Silversmithing Workshop outlining the challenges of developing a career as a contemporary designer and inviting students to participate in our mentoring program. In 2013, Fivefold Studio became a patron of the School of Art. We were only 6 months old when this happened. We presented an award at the graduating exhibition, and this award went to a girl, which is now giving her the opportunity to have her own solo exhibition, ongoing representation in our gallery, and be part of our mentoring program. And I warmly invite you all to join us for the opening of her solo exhibition on Thursday, the 3rd of April at 6 p.m. By developing these relationships with students, we can assure that on their completion, they will step into a community which will be supportive and active in their local community. No more flying off on the federal highway, they're here to stay. On the day we opened, we had activated 16 emerging artists, representing them proudly in our gallery. Our workshop provided a permanent space for 5 tenants and casual access for multiple more. But most importantly, we had the capacity to harness our community, and in doing so, we empowered our fellow creatives to actively pursue making. Today, Fivefold continues to grow. We now represent 22 artists. We have 2 gallery interns who are makers themselves and developing their own practice. And most importantly, we have watched the emerging makers who we engage with on a daily basis grow with confidence and ability. They have all started their own small businesses with us. Canberra has been incredibly supportive of our venture, and in turn, our emerging artists are staying here and they're giving back with creative ideas and industries. My career as an artist started out as an individual venture and has evolved into a business that supports and sustains a vital, creative thinking, creative makers and designers here to stay in Canberra. I encourage you all, as the women before me have spoken and the women after will, to think about what your individual passions are and how you can develop them to give back and empower those around you in your local community. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That's an extraordinary story of success and support to emerging artists. I love that idea of the mentorship that you do. Well, our next speaker is Anna Pino. Anna is the Chief Executive Officer of Lighthouse Business Innovation Centre. This is the organisation that's charged with administering the ACT Women's microcredit programme that we've heard quite a lot about tonight. Brilliant ideas. This includes providing training, mentoring and other support to help women on low incomes transition to the world of business, as well as providing loans. Lighthouse Business Innovation Centre is more generally a business incubator, assisting startups, early stage and high growth businesses through mentoring, business advice, education and training and networking opportunities. Anna has observed Canberra is not generally seen as a poster child for startup communities. However, under the cover of a public service town beats the heart of a buzzing and rapidly growing entrepreneurial community that does things a bit differently. Please join me in welcoming Anna.
Thank you. Given I come from innovative business, I'm going to try and use my iPad. Look, firstly, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here tonight, and also to the extraordinary women whose stories we've already heard. I don't consider myself extraordinary. I consider myself to be extraordinarily fortunate, and this is why. My path was pretty much ordained from the very beginning. My father immigrated from Italy in the late 70s, and he came to Australia like many other Europeans to work on major infrastructure projects. He got here and he was told, guess what, there's no job for you. So he was given the equivalent of a week's worth of wages and was told you're on your own. So he, like many others, ended up in an immigration camp just outside of Wangaratta, and he got on with it. He had a diploma in primary education, which is of absolutely no value when you don't speak English. So he's turned his hand to pretty much anything. He was picking fruit, he washed cars, he even became a short order cook, which for my dad, who literally couldn't boil water, was a pretty major achievement. And this pretty much set the expectations that my parents would have of myself and my brothers from day one. How we ended up in Canberra involves a busload of crazy men and soccer, but that's a whole other story. My parents knew each other from the age of 6, but my mother wasn't allowed to follow my father because of the traditions of the time unless they were married. So my parents got married by proxy. So for those of you that don't know what that is that my mother had a beautiful wedding ceremony in Italy while my father was picking fruit in Australia. And we have some extraordinary wedding photographs of my mother with my grandfather. So it makes for a very interesting story. So Mum arrived in Australia 12 months after Dad. She was terrified, and she was further traumatised when she arrived in Canberra because her first question was, where is the city? So you can imagine what Canberra was like in 1958. My brother was born 10 months later, and she didn't get to go back to Italy for another 10 years. I'm not sure that I would have the strength of character to do what my mother did, but during my journey I have met some of the most amazing women who are in their circumstances for all sorts of reasons, and how they deal with that never ceases to amaze me. The only thing that my parents expected of my brothers and I was that whatever we did well. They didn't care if we were garbage collectors as long as we were the best garbage collectors we could be. And I think that's a really strong position to put us in. My dad ended up working for a large civil engineering company which taught him to be a very, very good engineer. No university degrees back then. But at 52, he did what all of his friends thought was completely insane. He started his own company. He pretty much put everything on the line, including the kids, and he pretty much almost lost it all in the first year. And I still remember my mother saying to him, guess what, guys, we started with nothing, we'll start again. And that pretty much dictated my entire approach to life from that day. Fortunately, the business was very successful. It still exists today. Unfortunately, none of us kids went into that business, but he still watches it with great pride from the sidelines. Mum was pretty typical of her generation. School was considered unimportant. She was in fact pulled out of school at the age of 11, and she was taught to be a seamstress. It wasn't about having a career, it was about being a good mum and a good wife, which is probably a good thing, so my mother always hated making clothes for other people. So she never worked outside the home. Dad was really traditional, but funnily enough, he wasn't traditional with us, particularly with me. He and Mum encouraged me to study, to travel, and to be completely independent. Why that was, we still don't know. We don't know whether or not that was a rebellion against their own upbringing or a rebellion against the beliefs of the Italian community in Canberra at that time, but we didn't care. We took it and we ran with it. So I started working when I was 14 and 9 months. That was the legal age you could start working. I worked in the same major store for 8 years while I did my first 2 degrees. And during this time, I worked my way up to being the weekend manager. It's a really interesting experience working in retail. It's probably the best experience I've ever had. And it also taught me a lot about where my real skills were, and I think it was a lot to do with how I interact with people. My academic career is probably as unstructured as my professional career. I have a degree in psychology, computing science, business management and commerce. No connection whatsoever. But what I took out of all my studies was the ability to pull things apart and analyse them and come up with a solution. And my studies taught me about tenacity and desire to find a solution, which I think is key to pretty much everything we do. During my first degree, my older brother opened his first allied health practice, and he asked me to help him to work with him. He asked me to help him out as a receptionist and assistant. And this introduced me to some of the very different challenges associated with working with family. And many years later, I worked with my younger brother, and while the context was very different, the challenges were exactly the same. It's really, really hard, but it's absolutely essential to keep business and family separate, and it's exactly the same when you're working with your friends. We have seen many, many people fall over each other because they try to protect one relationship over the other. You can't do that. I actually really enjoyed working with my brothers, and yes, we still talk to each other. When I finally graduated from my first degree, I actually practiced as a psychologist with abused children for a year. I was way too young, I had no experience, and I certainly had no experience that was relevant. I came from the perfect family, so I decided that that was not my path forward. I've since completed another couple of degrees, and I've run a consultancy firm, I've run a catering company, I've been a public servant, I worked in advertising, managed an allied health company, been an investment manager for a small venture capital fund, and now my current role. Over the last 2 years, I've also discovered the many and varied challenges of not-for-profits, in honour of my mother, I've become heavily involved in the battle against diabetes, and I'm the president of Diabetes ACT, and I'm on the board of the Australian Diabetes Council in New South Wales. I'm also now the carer of my wonderful 82-year-old father. What have I learned about myself in this journey is that I love all things about business. I'm flexible, I'm prepared to try anything, and I think I'm reasonably good at what I do. I've also learned that I don't know it all, and it's really, really important to ask people for help when you need it. And it's also really, really important to surround yourself with mentors and people who know more than you do, because it's the best way to find out what you're actually going to do with yourself going forward. I've also learnt that I have no idea how to get this work-life balance everybody talks about. I'm thinking about it, but it just doesn't work. I'll get there eventually. When I was actually in the public service, I actually hit middle management in 5 years, and I was being groomed for greatness. But in 1996, I decided to take a package and leave. My parents thought I was absolutely insane, but my mother said, listen, if it's not what you want to do, don't do it. Go and find what you want to do. It was really easy decision for me to make. I had no children, I had no mortgage. But, you know, the way that women deal with those issues through circumstance rather than choice is something that we've come across a lot in the microcredit program as part of our Lighthouse business. There's a lot of women who are looking for a way to re-establish their independence and sense of self-worth, and that's what the program's all about. And many of those with kids want to leave a legacy for them, and those who are disadvantaged or have other disabilities want to make a valuable contribution to society. And this is something we've seen a lot of through the microcredit program. So you've all heard about Lighthouse, so what exactly are we? Lighthouse is a bit of an interesting hybrid. We get government funding, but we also get private sector funding, and we also do service delivery. I define us as a primer, so we're all about helping people set the right foundations for their businesses. We're also a startup, so we ourselves are looking at how we grow our business as Lighthouse so that we can be here in the long term. We're all about helping people realise their vision of independence through starting their own enterprise. Some people succeed in getting there and others don't, but we think that's just as important. So why is microcredit important? I think there's a couple of stats that make microcredit really interesting. Around 47% of employment in Australia is provided by micro and small businesses, which is a really large number. And about 32% of these businesses are actually owned by women in Australia, which I think is another really interesting statistic. And we believe that it's important to keep supporting those women. Originally, the microcredit program provided $3,000 of no interest rate loans. We've just expanded the program and we now can provide up to $10,000 with a small interest rate loan attached to it. So just some of the interesting stats. We've seen about 550 inquiries to the program. We've actually touched 450 women through the program. We've given out 60 loans. Sorry, we've had 60 loans applications. We've given out 41 loans, and we've had 5 partial defaults, which to us is an absolutely exceptional result. And while people haven't started businesses, they've actually gone back to work for us, is also very important. Just very quickly, people always ask me what my key takeouts are from the microcredit program. You've heard a lot of them today, but I'm just going to reinforce them. Learn to listen to your gut feeling. You can say no. It's perfectly okay. Women tend to undervalue themselves. Have a look at what you can offer. We can all offer a lot, and make sure you put an appropriate value on it. You don't have to be a leader to lead. You can still make a difference even if you're not at the head of the organisation. For men, it's about proving something. For women, it's about leaving something behind. Women want to leave a legacy for their families. And it's not just about money. As Yanni said, it's about re-engaging. It's about finding your own sense of purpose, and that's really important. Leave the baggage at the door. Really interesting to say, but we've all made mistakes. We've all had issues. You get past them. If you don't, there's a saying that says, if you don't deal with these things, you will always behave in a way consistent with your own self-identity. And look to learn from unusual sources. Surround yourself with all sorts of people. Get involved with all sorts of networks. Just talk to people. There's amazing support out there for you. And finally, motivation only gets you so far. You have to introduce daily habits and routines to be successful in whatever you do, not just business. So I'll leave it there, but if anyone wants to talk to me about the program, I'm more than happy to talk to you afterwards.
Thank you, Anna. And for me, it was lovely to have that reminder that we all stand on the shoulders of our mothers and the other women who've gone before us. Well, we're here at Speaker 10. Our final speaker this evening is a person who works in an industry not traditionally associated with women. Wendy Tengstrom is the Master Builders Association Group Training General Manager. However, she's also made her mark on the industry. Last year, she was awarded the GE Shaw Construction Support Award at the National Association of Women in Construction ACT Awards. Wendy's work is integral to the ongoing development opportunities of workers in the building industry, as she manages skills and training development on behalf of the Master Builders Association. Thank you for waiting to be our lucky last, Wendy, and welcome.
Hello all. I just want to say thank you for inviting me to speak today. I suppose for me, I've listened to everyone else, and there's so many threads that seem to link us all together that I'm sitting here thinking, wow, I might as well not give this speech, because in fact so many people have said exactly what I would like to say. I obviously work in a real male-dominated world. I still don't wear steel caps, and I certainly don't wear a high-vis shirt. However, it isn't easy working in a male-dominated world. It's actually quite difficult. But I must say, at Master Builders, I've had some amazing opportunities. So I'm really pleased to be there, and this is where I want to be for some time to come. I was born in Johannesburg. You can obviously hear the South African accent. At the age of 7, we relocated to Durban, which is a coastal city. I matriculated in 1980 and started work in an administrative role. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I'm the second child of 4. My family would be considered working class. We struggled. I met my husband in my final year of school, and we were married in 1983. My son of 17 was born in 1997. He's swimming a 400-metre freestyle as we speak. And my daughter of 15 was born in 1998. 7 years after matriculating, I started a Bachelor of Commerce with the University of South Africa, which is commonly known as UNISA. I had to work in a full-time job during this time. I studied as I funded my own training. Vet fee or HEX funding were not available in South Africa. In fact, there aren't many benefits that are available to citizens of South Africa from a funding perspective. I took a number of years to complete my degree. However, I eventually received my qualification, and I was the first member of my family to complete a degree. Since then, my elder sister has finished her degree in photography. When my children were 4 and 3 respectively, we decided that we wanted to emigrate and provide our family with a safe environment to live in. Australia was our country of choice, and although it took some time for our immigration to be approved, we arrived in Canberra in February 2002. We were fortunate to meet wonderful friends soon after our arrival, who supported us as we settled into our new lifestyle. As a young family with no support network, this has been so important to our children, who do not see their blood relatives very often. Our friends have supported and mentored our children. My son is completing year 12, and my daughter is in year 11. The lifestyle in Australia provides young children so many opportunities. I encourage both my children to undertake further education, either at university or through vocational education. I believe that we should adopt lifelong learning. We are never too young or too old to learn a new skill. Recently, I decided that I should hold a vocational qualification if I'm an ambassador for vocational education. Late last year, I spent many hours reading, researching, and doing assignments, and in January 2014, I completed and was determined competent in the Diploma of Management. So I hold both. My working career included a number of employers, as I became bored as soon as my job became routine for me. I have held many roles, particularly accounting roles in different sectors. The most interesting accounting position I held was in a pathology lab in South Africa. However, over the past few years, 12 years, I have developed a real passion for vocational education. And in my role at MBA Group Training, which includes financial, managerial, and people skills, together with operating an RTO, which is a registered training organisation, and a GTO, which is a group training organisation, in other words, we train and employ apprentices, I have found my niche. In 2002, shortly after I arrived in Australia, I joined Satya, which is also an RTO and GTO in the construction industry. I can't get away from this industry. Great-looking boys sometimes, but I'm surprised there aren't more men in this group. What a waste. So I worked there for 3 years, and during a restructure process, I decided to try a less pressured job. Within 3 months, I needed a challenge. I approached MBA Group Training for position and training, and I've worked for MBA Group Training for close on 7 years. I hold the role of General Manager, and my responsibilities cover management of both the RTO and GTO, promoting and growing the business, monitoring the budget, compliance, and continuous improvement. This is the longest I have worked for any organisation, and the prospect of long service leave is looking promising. MBA group training is also an RTO and GTO in the construction industry, so obviously that's where my area of interest is. Vocational education must be the most challenging and rewarding career. Continuous improvement is the cornerstone for RTOs and GTOs, and continuous improvement is ongoing. You can never do it better. At least you can always do it better. You can never stop being better. So how could I ever get bored in this environment? Working with school-based students and full-time apprentices, providing quality training and observing the skills and achievements of these driven young women, and they're very few in our industry, and men, is so motivating. Observing the pride that their parents reflect when they complete or win an award is incredibly rewarding for me and the talented team I work with. I'll just relate an incident. Last year in September, November, we have a group that we call the Kids Assist program. These are young Year 10 students. We started this program probably 12 years ago when they didn't have to go to school until they were in Year 12, or they didn't have to, or 17. They could bail out if they wanted to. And a lot of these youngsters were bailing out and unable to find work. So we created this construction program. We took on 36 students, 3 groups, and we put them through the Cert 2 in construction. Not many of them stay in the industry, but what we found was they stayed at school, and they actually completed Year 10, and many of them move into Year 12. Last year at our awards day, we had an award, and one of the big companies in the ACT, a construction company, offered an apprenticeship to a young apprentice, a Year 10 student. He had done particularly well, and his message to the trainers at the end of his session was, I need to get a tutor because this is where I want to be, and my maths is weak. Well, when they awarded him the apprenticeship, we had this incredible sobbing happening to our right, and it was his father. And of course, this young man stepped off the podium, came to his father and consoled his dad. But when I looked around, there's my executive director, tears in his eyes, deputy executive director, tears in his eyes, and all these very strong, robust boys were all in tears. But what a moving opportunity for us. We were amazed that parents can be so delighted with the outcomes of their children, or so desperate for their children to have an opportunity. So for me, this motivates me every day. The opportunities and support that young Australians are afforded is incredible. Having lived in South Africa for 38 years of my life and knowing the hardship that many people on the African continent experience provides me with an appreciation of the good fortune I have experienced. Although we did not have a lot of money growing up as a child, I was fortunate enough to complete 12 years of schooling, not usual in South Africa for a lot of the African population. We lived in reasonable accommodation and I had loving parents. My schooling provided the gateway for me to undertake a university degree, and many wonderful mentors and friends guided me through my career choices, and today I work in an incredibly rewarding position. For many women throughout the world, this is not an option. Limited education and family pressures are responsible for many young women in Africa remaining in that poverty cycle. What do you do when you have no food? You find a job that feeds you and your family, if you are lucky enough to find a job. It is not a choice for them, but a desperate response to a dire situation. This is an example of an extreme example at one end of the spectrum. Closer to home here in Australia, working with women in the construction industry, they're mostly office-based construction project managers, etc. I still observe women who are not confident to step forward and undertake training, who are unsure of their capabilities and their potential, who self-doubt. Mentoring and encouraging them to start the learning process often starts the ball rolling. They do one qual, they want to do another. We should all be conscious of those people around us and encourage and assist others to grow. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Wendy, for that inspiring story to round off our evening of 10 inspiring stories. Well, I'm delighted that CMAG and the ACT Office for Women has provided this programme to celebrate International Women's Day. Many thanks to our colleagues at the ACT Office for Women. Just to turn to CMAG for a moment, if you've been enjoying this beautiful image that's also on the programme that we handed out, do come back when CMAG's open to see this lovely work in the flesh, or in the oil, so to speak, by a female artist, Ethel Carrick-Fox. And while you're here, do have a look at our wonderful new Elliot Gruner exhibition, one of the largest exhibitions we've ever put on at CMAG, and I do encourage you to come and enjoy that exhibition. Well, a big thank you to all our speakers tonight. It's been an honour to hear from such talented and passionate women. I'd also like to thank the wonderful staff of the Visitor Services, Education and Community Programmes team here at CMAG for all their hard work in developing and presenting this programme. My thanks and congratulations to Sophie Chessel, Kate Gardner, our wonderful timekeeper, Kath Moran, James Porridge and Danica von Buren. Also to Michael Bailey for doing the live streaming of tonight's event and being one of very few men in the room. I do think that when we talk about the achievements of women, we should always acknowledge all the support that we get from men in achieving the things that we do. I know that when I get home tonight, there'll be a beautiful roast dinner that my partner is cooking for me as we speak. Well, thank you, the audience. I can't take you all home with me, unfortunately, to enjoy that dinner. That might cause a little bit of domestic tension. But thank you for being here tonight, for taking the time to join us for these 10 inspiring stories. You've been great company. Thank you and good night.